to episode number 071 of Something Else with Arya and Not KJ. This is a very special episode. And first of all, it is exclusive to my listeners right here on YouTube. And you might be wondering why I'm randomly doing this episode. You're probably saying, hey, you already are posting an episode I'm not going to listen to. Actually, you're probably going to. This is where it gets funny. Episode 70 is probably going to get posted after 71 at this point. Um, but anywho, this is the one time a year when I review an AEW TV show. I review Winter is Coming purely because my last name is Witner. And 4 years ago, when they first did Winter is Coming, I made the joke at the time that if I ever went back into podcasting, every year I would do Winter is Coming, but call it Whitner is Here. And it got a few laughs. And so here we are. This, unlike Winter's Coming, is only the second ever Witners Here episode. The other is on all of our prior streaming platforms. It exists somewhere in the universe. If you get a chance, if you find it, check it out. I talked about last year's Winter's Coming show, and now we talk about this year's. So before we get into it, by the way, I know that, I don't have the largest audience in the world right now, but I think it's, at least fairly consistent. And I like to think that most of y'all, especially since you keep listening to every show, or at least most shows, you, you know, you enjoy the show and you support me this way. So I'd like to ask you to support me a different way. If you'd like to support this show without paying an extra penny, please consider using my Amazon referral link, which is tinyurl.com/something else Amazon. It is in the description of the show. You just use Amazon like normal. You don't pay anything extra, but I get a small kickback, which helps me pay for upgrades and the admittedly small amount I have to pay to produce this show. Now, this show, first of all, and you're probably realizing this since there's only one version of it posted, it's only an audio show. I don't have the time, ability, or desire to push my bounds with my YouTube copyright strikes to post the video of this particular episode of Dynamite. So it's audio only. I'm sure that there are ways to see the video if you didn't watch Dynamite tonight and you want to watch and follow along, there are ways you can do that. So, with that, because this is going to be a long episode, I'm going to bet, because there's a lot to go over here. Well, maybe not, but I guess we'll see how long the show actually goes. Watch, I'll be done in 20 minutes. But let's dive into it. This is AEW Dynamite. Winter is Coming. The fourth annual Winter is Coming. December 13th, 2023. live from Arlington, Texas. As of about 12 hours before the show started, WrestleTix on Twitter said there were 3,312 tickets out and about 800 more that were still being sold. So we'll see how that goes. The lead-in to this episode of Dynamite was an episode of The Big Bang Theory where Raj takes pills that make him confident to get naked in front of random girls at coffee shops. Believe me when I tell you, it's funnier than it sounds. So we didn't get an open to the show. We immediately have Samoa Joe storming to the ring to discuss what happened last week, where MJF was allegedly laid out, allegedly by a beer bottle. The fans do love them some Joe here, and this was a good crowd for the most part. We'll get to the parts where they weren't so great, but they were, they were pretty hot for the good shit on this show. So Joe has come here looking for answers. He promised to keep MJF whole until World's End when he would beat him for the world title. And then he talks about the beer bottle. The beer bottle is a brand used by a certain cowboy. And with it, there was a stench of Stetson and disappointment. But when he looked around the arena, a certain Hangman was missing. At this point, Hangman Page Hangman Page strolled out. See, I don't just stutter when I'm talking about 40-year-old wrestling. Hangman dared Joe to make these accusations to his face. Page said he did not care about this whole MJF, Adam Cole, Delia Bob. Joe said he's not a detective, he's an executioner, and Page dared him to jump. Out came Roderick Strong in a neck brace and eyeglasses, who said Joe is lucky he's not hurt. He should listen to Hangman since he is Roddy's young boy. Roddy brings up Jay White, being assaulted by the devil and his people. He brings up the Acclaim being assaulted by the devil and his people, but we never actually see MJF get beaten up. He makes a point. He's the MJF is the only person here who got attacked, who allegedly got attacked, who allegedly got laid out, but we never actually saw it. He was already just laying down. And, hey, if anything's going to point fingers at our resident scumbag, that would be one reason here. So somehow takes offense to this and tries to get involved. Roderick Strong tries shoving him off and gets punched in the face. Aubrey rolled in, Joe rolled out, the bell rings, and our first match is on. So I have a question for you. If Roderick Strong hadn't come out here, what would have been the point of this? Joe came out to accuse Hangman and then just left. He didn't get any answers. Nothing happened here. He just accused Hangman and moved on with his life. Maybe Joe's the, masked devil guy, except, you know, the devil is not shaped like Joe. We'll be nice here and say that the devil is more Mac shaped than Joe shaped. So anywho, we get our opener, Roderick Strong versus Hangman Page. Matt Taven and Mike Bennett are ringside in Roddy's corner. Taven held up a sign that he stole from a fan of the crowd saying neck strong. And, I gotta tell you here, neck health awareness is very important, people, and you should take a listen to it. Excalibur brought up the fact that these two have wrestled 3 times before this in singles matches, and Roddy has a 2-1 record. And during this match, by the way, they announced that there are 5 more matches and a segment featuring the Golden Jets tonight, which I made a comment. It makes me wonder if this fucking show is 6 hours long. It wasn't, but damn, we'll get to this later. They really rushed some shit towards the end. Paige did a plancha to the outside and teased doing a moonsault to the floor, but Bennett hopped up on the apron, distracting Aubrey, so Taven distracted Paige, allowing Strong to drop him with a backbreaker on the top turnbuckles to send us to commercial. Now, I made a comment here, I made a note, and this happens pretty for almost the entire show, and I'll mention the exception when we get to it. But they go to commercial, they do the picture in picture, and the two people in the match are just doing a ton of spots, just hitting each other over and over again, doing random shit. And then, literally, as the commercial break is about to end, one person puts the other person in a hold. In this case, Roddy put Hangman in a hold. They gave each other simultaneous elbows, which got the approval of a guy who looked like Santa Claus in the crowd. Strong got to his feet first, but Hangman was impervious to pain somehow. It at this point was time for him to stomp a mud hole and walk it dry on Roderick Strong. Page hits the Yakuza kick in the corner, um, and bit Strong in his face on the ropes. Strong was like, meh, whatever, and went for a power bomb that Page fought out of. Page landed on his feet on a moonsault and hit a pop-up sit-out power bomb for a near fall. The story that they told here was that Page didn't hook both shoulders on the pinfall, and that could be why Strong kicked out here. Hangman sets up for the buckshot, but the Kingdom got involved and got their asses kicked. Hangman hit them with a moonsault outside the ring, and then hit Roddy with a dead eye inside the ring for the win. It was a good opener. Definitely. It would set the tone for the show here. So going into the Blue League of the Continental Classic, Danielson, Brody, and Andrade all have 6 points. Brody and Andrade on have only wrestled 2 matches going into this, but Danielson with his 6 points has already had 3 matches. So, and the tie's got to be broken in our next match with Brody and Andrade. No matter what happens here, Danielson at best is going to be tied for second at best. We go to the Continental Classic Blue League match. It is Brody King versus Andrade El Idolo. I gotta tell you, when I saw this match announced earlier today, it wasn't exactly lighting my world on fire. Before the match, they did show Brody being both Eddie Kingston and Claudio, and Andrade getting a big win over Daniel Bryanson last week. I got a question. So every, show, they do a pretty decent job, in my opinion anyway, of running down the rules. They try to do a good job of keeping up the scoreboard. To be honest, this week especially, it actually drove me fucking nuts. Suddenly, I understand why people are complaining about that scoreboard after weeks of me going, what the hell are you all complaining about? It's pretty easy. But anywho, so two of the rules they talk about are how there's no interference allowed, which in theory there shouldn't be interference allowed in any match, but that's beyond the point. And also there's no seconds or managers allowed at ringside. So let me ask, what happens if it does? What happens? Now you might sit here and say, oh, well, if the House of Black came out, if Julie Hart came out, Malachi Black came out, Brody King would be disqualified and Andrade will win. Okay. Theoretically, that's supposed to happen in a wrestling match with interference anyway. So, what are the other penalties? Because in theory, there has to be some other penalty, um, if this is such a big deal. Because in theory, if we're going to keep with the whole, wrestling is real thing, and I know we've really blown the roof of that one in the past, but if we go with the idea that wrestling is real, you know, if somebody has a manager and Andrade has CJ Perry, Brody King, I guess Julie Hart's not technically a manager. You could probably make that argument. Technically, they have the right to have their seconds at ringside to shout, encouragement or what have you to them or to give them strategy or whatever. You know, in theory, they should be allowed to do that. But, we're going to ignore that, I guess. We're just going to pretend that that's not what actually is the point. If wrestling is real, if that actually was the point of a manager. Taz, during this match, talked about how he's won a few championships despite being shorter than 6'3". And I should point out that one time he blocked me on Twitter because I laughed at a stupid angle the WWF ran with him and Stacy Keibler talking about how Stacy was looking for a tall, handsome man, and she brought out Taz, who is like 5 inches shorter than she is. Tony Schiavone kept bringing up Brody winning the 2022 Royal Rampage Battle Royal, which I doubt anybody, including Brody King, actually remembered. Um, at this point, they announced that the semifinals of the Continental Classic is on Dynamite in 2 weeks, which makes you realize that this damn tournament, which seems to be going well too long and too short, is almost over. I was half paying attention into the commercial break here, but saw Brody slap on a chin lock, and I'm like, I guess the commercial's ending. And sure enough, during the commercial break, by the way, Brody sat Andrade on a chair in front of the guardrail and then splashed him into the guardrail, which they talked about how, hey, if there wasn't padding on that guardrail, Andrade would have slammed the back of his head on metal and it would have hurt like a motherfucker and probably would have injured him. Meanwhile, Andrade made his comeback and hit a pair of really nice dragon screw leg whips. I get, especially in comparison to everything you see in wrestling these days, that a dragon screw leg whip is a fairly basic move. It's kind of like in some ways, it's like an arm drag. Everyone does an arm drag, but Ricky Steamboat did a wonderful and beautiful looking arm drag. In this case, and we see somebody else do one later, everyone does a dragon screw leg whip, but Andrade, it looked really good when Andrade did it. You know, just gonna say. Andrade went for the running double knees in the corner, but Brody quickly moved out of the way, bounced off the opposite ropes, and knocked Andrade ass over tea kettle with a lariat that only got a 2 count. Andrade, at one point, and this was kind of cool, Andrade takes a big step, looking like he's actually doing a big boot, but instead he uses it as a big step to go and basically hit the Judas effect. Um, a minute later, Brody goes for a superplex, which Andrade somehow turns into a DDT on the exposed turnbuckle because he undid the padding between the turnbuckle pad and the post, and he dropped Brody's head on that, and then pinned him with a hammerlock DDT in the ring. Andrade now has 9 points and is far away in the lead as he has beaten both Brody King and Bryan Danielson, and everyone now has 3 matches. So, it continues on Collision this week with Brody King versus Bryan Danielson. And, I think Eddie Kingston's wrestling Daniel Garcia, so Andrade is wrestling Claudio, which takes care of everyone over on Collision this week. Renee is backstage with Kevin, Ross, and Marshall Von Erich. Now, there seems to be a debate whether Kevin is still living in Hawaii or if he's moved back to Texas. I hope he lives in Texas because if not, they flew this poor motherfucker all the way from Hawaii. They advertised it for a week. They flew him in from Hawaii so he could talk for 6 seconds because he starts talking about he loves the style of AEW and he has friends here. When in walks Trent, Orange Cassidy, and Danhausen. Orange complimented Renee's outfit and then asked Ross and Marshall to be his partners in a six-man tag on Rampage. Danhausen and Trent were offended until Orange pointed out that they were in Texas, which somehow made complete sense. I'm sure David will be on Rampage, especially since his kids are apparently going to be in a six-man tag with Orange Cassidy. But they promoted all week long he was going to be on Dynamite for this. By the way, the show ended and we never found out who they're wrestling on Friday. Without, they're taping Rampage literally as I'm taping this show. So I don't know who they're wrestling. But if I had to just guess, just because, why the hell not? It's probably Jake Hager and 2.0, maybe. But that's just my somewhat educated guess here. So at that point, after it sounds like the show's gone, an hour on its own already. I promise it's only gone about 45 minutes. Out come the Golden Jets, who has a team, haven't been around since Full Gear. And apparently, after Jericho and Omega beat the Young Bucks, Jericho was cutting a promo backstage and got his ass kicked by Big Bill and Ricky Starks, including them running an anvil case into his arm. Somehow I do not remember that. And I watched Full Gear. I enjoyed Full Gear for the most part. Omega, who has heard the crowd sing Judas for 4 years, said he did not know the words of the song until now. Um, it's actually funny that, like, I get that Omega got over a lot more as, a wrestler than a talker, but I've always just kind of accepted that he can talk decently well. But, you know, this was not his strong point, and he's in there with 3 men. Ricky Stark's a good promo. Jericho, is a great promo. Big Bill has never been known for his promos, but Big Bill outshined him by far here, people. This was not his best one. And I should point out that I keep forgetting that Ricky Starks and Big Bill are the AEW Tag Team Champions. with all due respect, I also forget that Finn Balor and Damian Priest are the WWE Tag Team Champions, and they're on Raw literally all the fucking time. So that's more on me than anybody else. Ricky sarcastically thanked Kenny for AEW and then said Jericho sucks the life out of everything in AEW, bringing up the Inner Circle and the Jericho Appreciation Society. Big Bill brings up that if Jericho attacked Omega, nobody, nobody would be surprised. Omega, and this is where Omega's promo started going downhill as he was tripping over his words quite a bit here. He asks if he crusts Jericho and then realizes he said crusts instead of trusts and changes himself up and says he doesn't trust Jericho either. Omega brings up Cass's past by mentioning the firm, which it's been near an hour and a half, 2 hours since this promo aired. And I remembered the firm was a thing, but for the fucking life of me, I can't tell you who else was in the firm. I imagine Smart Mark Sterling, just because he's supposed to be a lawyer. But legitimately, I don't fucking remember a goddamn thing about the firm. And if you told me the firm was just 6 months ago, I'd believe you. But that doesn't mean I remember what the hell the firm was. And, literally, that literally the firm is as you know, has actually the firm is less uh famous than Brandy's heel stable from a few years ago when she had that girl cut her hair on television just to do nothing. It was like her, Awesome Kong, Bald Girl, and Luther in his first of 85 gimmicks in AEW. Anywho, Omega calls Big Cass soft and says Omega says he gets beaten down every 2 weeks, but says that at World's End, the Winnipeg Jets will win the tag team titles. And then remember, the Winnipeg Jets are a hockey team, and they're the Golden Jets, and says they will win the tag team titles as well. Stark says that he's beaten Jericho twice this year. Jericho says that Starks and Bill need a tag team name, and he calls them the Absolute Assholes, which gets sound edited. He calls them the Rick and the Dick, which gets sound edited, and then calls them Big Billy Starks. And literally, it took Excalibur whispering into this to remind people that Billy Starks is the name of the woman in the main event of the ROH show, it's not the ROH pay-per-view, but the ROH Honor Club pay-per-view show on Friday, because, they just randomly said it. And, I don't think I would bet you $1 that Jericho probably forgot that Billy Starks was actually the name of a woman, wrestling in AEW. Um, anyway, Jericho tried to get the fans chanting it, but everyone acknowledged that was a sucky name. Um, Jericho says Starks is less charismatic than Enzo Amore, which was apparently the insult upon insults, the line to set Starks off. And Starks went off on them both, calling them two Winnipeg scumbags. And Omega, like, we always say that, promos just come to an end. Omega literally announced that it was now the end of the promo and did the goodbye and good night thing. Now, by the way, for those who, don't remember such a thing, 1 year ago at Winter Is Coming, Chris Jericho lost to Action Andretti. Tell me how Action Andretti's doing these days. Actually, tell me how Action Andretti was doing, I don't know, 6 weeks after that match. So I remember they pushed him a little bit, and that was about it. So we are now an hour into the show. Do you remember what happened at the end of last week's Dynamite? Do you? I'll help you remember here. At the end of last week's Dynamite, Nick Wayne's mom, Shayna Wayne, turned heel and helped Christian beat Adam Copeland in the main event. They brought that up for the first time an hour into the show and never brought it up again. Tony Storm and Mariah May came out, and Storm is doing commentary for our next match, which is Ruby Soho versus Riho. They bring up how back in April, Tony and Ruby beat Rio in a tag team match and then spray painted her, which was the last match before she went back to Japan. Ruby, who is wearing Beetlejuice inspired tights, has either dyed her hair black or has let the green go out, which Tony pointed out repeatedly was proof that this was not Ruby Soho, which was kind of funny. But, th I gotta say, I gotta bring this up. And again, I know AEW has 6 million problems. And maybe if they fixed a couple of these, we'd be back to being, just as hot as they were, 3, 4 years ago before the pandemic, or even right after the pandemic, they were still pretty hot. However, I'm not going to say that Riho was ever hot in terms of character and momentum, but her returns are constantly meaning less and less. And we can make a long list. And this is an ongoing thing. We can make a long list of people on this show whose momentum got swiftly booted in the jaw and don't mean anything anywhere near what they used to. And Riho is right up there. Honestly, if you look at the history of champions in AEW, the people who like it doesn't have to be the people who stayed in AEW, just the people immediately after losing the belts, what where their momentum went. Riho, Nyla Rose, SCU, Hangman Page, Scorpio Sky is a single, Wardlow, Hikaru Shida, Britt Baker. Those are just the ones that came off the top of my head. And like literally, they were all champions. They were all on top of the world. Then they lost the belts and fell off the face of the earth. Legit, I don't remember what Hangman Page did after losing the world title to Punk. Like, I remember Punk got injured, came back, and all that shit happened. But what the fuck did Hangman do? Like, the next thing I remember him doing was 3 months later when they did the Trios tournament where he teamed with the Dark Order. Legit. And you can sit here and say, well, Riho is this. And I know a lot of people don't like Riho. I will say, especially during her original run, that she was pretty damn good. And, I kind of get the hate, but at the same time, I didn't get the hate because, especially at the time, she was one of, if not the best woman they had at the time. And before someone screams at me, Britt Baker, Britt really didn't take off until she turned heel. And that was either at the very end of the Riho title reign or after she lost the belt the first time. So it's like, don't don't bring that up at the time. Anywho, oh, by the way, an FTR, and I about this FTR after they lost the tag titles the first time, they disappeared for like, 7, 8 months until they did the Pinnacle angle with MJF and Jericho. By the way, as it comes to the match, Riho won with the running knee, and it was a fine match, nothing wrong with it. It was nothing you're going to remember tomorrow, but there's nothing wrong with the match. They show a Wardlow video package where Wardlow vows to be the person to beat Max for the AEW title. We go to our next Continental Classic Gold League match, and this is where we start really rushing it because at this point, there's about 45 minutes left in the show, and we have 3 tournament matches, and we know that, because it's been reported, Tony doesn't want to cut time out of these matches. He wants to have full matches here. But unfortunately, this is one of those times where it's like shit needed to get cut because shit was being rushed here. Like that Tony Storm or not Tony Storm Rio, but Riho versus Ruby Soho, that could have been on Rampage. So I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of people who are like, oh man, the women's segment, you got to push women more. I agree. Let's push women more, but you got to decide that some things are more important. And the Hangman thing, if you didn't see the show, the Hangman thing comes back. So that was important to be on the show. You had to have the tournament matches. You could have put the Andrade Brody King match on Collision. I get it, but to be honest, they should have put the women's match on Collision and just gave, so not even so they could give other people more time because, you know, so they didn't have to rush through everything. Because especially when we get to the end, that main event, especially the very end of it, got rushed. And I refuse to believe that it's John Moxley and Swerve Strickland because whether or not you hate John Moxley or not you love John Moxley, he's been doing this a long ass fucking enough amount of time that if you gave him 17 minutes, he suddenly isn't going to get the match picked up at the 16-minute mark, and suddenly the goddamn match is over, you know, and that's basically what happened here. But Roosh and Jay Lethal, Roosh comes in with 3 points, Lethal has zero. The story here, as it was with Mark Briscoe in the next match, is that Jay Lethal is playing spoiler since he's already eliminated. Roosh has to win out and get some luck in order to advance to the semifinals. The fans who, by the way, I didn't note this, but the fans didn't care all that much for the Riho match, but they cared even less for this one. Don't get me wrong, there were spots where they got into it, but the fans knew, I don't know if the fans knew this was going to be a quickie, but the fans realized Jay Lethal's going to lose because it's obvious at this point they were building up to Jay Lethal and Mark Briscoe, both with 0 points in the last night and one of them having to win. And it is what it is, I guess. But they also knew Roosh had 3 points, and there's no amount of, well, if Roosh wins here and he wins next week, and Jay White loses, and this that happens, everyone knew that wasn't going to fucking happen either. It's like he needed way too much help at 3 points. So it's like it was a fine match. It was a fun match. There's nothing wrong with the match. However, like I said, everyone knew that A, Roosh was winning, and B, neither of them were going to be continuing on into the semifinals. That's it. Um, and by the way, Roosh wins with a rear naked choke. They pushed it a little bit that, Moxley choked him out in their match. And so this has been on his mind all week long. They should have, to really nail that home, they should have aired, like during the introductions, they should have aired their match, the ending of each of their match last week, and they should have done this for each person because they did it a couple times here and there. But if you're going to do something where you're going to bring up a finish or play off a finish from last week, you need to assume that not everybody's Excalibur and keeps a 300-page notebook for every single match. Remind us, hey, remember last week when Roosh wrestled Moxley and Moxley choked Roosh the fuck out? Roosh has been thinking about that all week. Not after Roosh wins in, his match with the same rear naked choke. So after the match, Jeff Jarrett, Karen Jarrett, and Sanjay Dutt came out and tried to console Jay Lethal, but Jay Lethal was despondent and just not having it. We then got our next Continental Classic Gold League match. It's Jay White, who's coming in with 6 points, versus Mark Briscoe with 0 points. And they were really rushing it here. And because it was obvious they were running along and they wanted to get these matches, especially like the last one and these next two matches, they really wanted to give them all the time that they could get. Uh, and this is really bring up that Roosh needs Jay White to either do a draw in each of his last two matches or lose in each of the last two matches. And then some other bullshit that, spoiler alert, is not gonna mean a damn thing. They actually show a lot of ROH footage of Mark wrestling Jay White. Um, Mark used the froggy bow early, but Jay rolled to the ground to avoid the cover. Back in the ring, Mark was running wild until Jay grabbed him in a high crotch throw and threw Mark over the top rope, with Mark hitting the apron hard. All right, so they did a lot less during the commercial break, but literally just as the commercial break was ending, Jay locks on a chin lock. I don't know why. It's like, do they not know there's a picture in picture and we can see what the hell they're doing here, people? Anyway, during this match, They quickly run down the card for Final Battle, which includes Tony Nese versus Ethan Page in an I Quit match, and they talk about how this has been building up for months. Guess what? I don't know how many people actually watch ROH, but I know I'm not fucking one of them, so I got no goddamn idea why these two people are wrestling in an I Quit match. And to be honest, since I don't actually know, it comes off more like a Vince Russo I Quit match where, hey, let's just have an I Quit match for the hell of it. But anyway, they also announced, and I don't know if this is the first time they announced it or not, because I no longer get invited to the AEW pre-pay-per-view press conferences, but they announced that El Hijo de El Vikingo and Black Taurus will be wrestling on Friday for the AAA Mega Championship. So for all the crap I say, this was a fun match. Even though, like with the last match, it did suffer because even though they were trying to play up the story that Mark was trying to play spoiler here and keep Jay White from, advancing, you know, everybody knew Mark was losing. And at the end of the day, Mark, I'm sorry, it's like, you know, Mark loses far more than he wins. And it sucks that that's the way that he's I don't want to say he's always been booked, but if you look at Jay Briscoe versus Mark Briscoe as a single, Mark seems to have always been you know, I don't want to say the designated jobber, but I went to a lot of ROH shows where Jay and Mark wrestled as singles, and Mark seemed to always lose, and Jay seemed to either always win or be booked really strong in defeat. And not that Mark doesn't put on a fun show, not that he doesn't have good matches, just that it's like Jerry Lynn, in some ways. Like when you watch Jerry Lynn, you knew he was going to lose, even though the match may be fun, the match may be really good. It may be, one of those matches you talk about 10, 15 years from now. But at the end of the day, you see them wrestle and you're like, okay, he's losing. And that's kind of where you are with Mark Briscoe. And, it's not fair to Mark Briscoe, but that's basically the way that he's pretty much always been booked for whatever reason. So anyway, um, Jay blocks a Drake. Blah, 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 that should have been a lot easier for me to say than it was. Jay blocks a Jay driller and uses a dragon screw, which, as I mentioned earlier, when Andrade did it, that other people would use it. But while Jay White did a nice dragon screw leg whip, it was nowhere in the league of Andrade's dragon screw earlier. Mark drops Jay White on his neck and goes for another froggy bow, but Jay gets his knees up, hit the Blade Runner, and eliminates Roosh with the pin. There's a 30, 45-second video building up the Blackpool Combat Club versus FTR and Mark Briscoe match for Final Battle. Legit, this match should have been built up more on Dynamite and Collision, and I guarantee if it had been, people would want to watch this show for this match. Like they bring up, and they showed a Danielson promo, or they showed clips of a Danielson promo where he talks about last year's Final Battle was Jay Briscoe's last match, and it was this amazing dog collar match with the Briscoes and FTR, where the Briscoes won the tag team titles and what was I don't know if it was Jay's last match, but if it was at least Jay's last Ring of Honor match. And you know, and in a way they said this is going to be a tribute to Jay. And you know, I think this could have been really good if it played out on a TV show that people actually watched. Unfortunately, it didn't, and it wasn't. So from there, we immediately go to the Continental Classic Gold League match, the main event of the night. Swerve Strickland, undefeated with 9 points, versus John Moxley, undefeated with 9 points. So my theory is here that Mox is wrestling Jay White next week in the last match. So I presume Swerve wins here. So we end the Gold League with a winner advances match with Mox and Jay White next week. Now what happened? I'm sure there's a madness to the method, so I'm assuming, Mox is in the semifinals unless, something screwy happens, and there would have to really be something screwy to happen for it not to happen. But anyway, so I'm assuming Mox is in the semifinals and he's gonna probably wrestle Swerve, and that's when he loses to Swerve, and Swerve moves on to the finals where I don't even know who the hell he's gonna wrestle. Andrade, Danielson. It's weird that it it'd be really weird for Eddie Kingston to not make the finals since it's his fucking world title. It's his two titles to start the damn thing off anyway. But, whatever. But anyway, so they rang the bell at 9:45 Eastern. So we have a 20-minute time limit, and we know online that TK asked for the extra 5 minutes. So right from the bell, we're teasing the time limit here. And I should point out that my prediction, and keep in mind my predictions are shit, but my prediction is that Swerve is winning the AEW title next year. We'll see if that happens. So early on, Mox backs Swerve into the corner and kisses Swerve's nose. So a minute later, Swerve backs Mox into the ropes and returned the kiss to the nose. Swerve used the head scissors to send Mox to the outside, and Moxley basically seemed ready for some good old-fashioned outside the ring brawling, but Swerve just stayed in the middle of the ring and dared Mox to get back in, which he did. So Swerve uses a DDT off the middle rope to Moxley. Now, as I say that, you may think I mean, well, a jumping DDT, a leaping DDT. No, I don't mean that. Like, oh, you might think, oh, it's a tornado DDT. Hooks him like DDT, runs up the ropes, swings him around, hits it from there. No. Moxley is on the middle rope, going for a what a maneuver, and Swerve jumps up and DDTs him off of the middle rope onto the mat. Now I am trying very hard to not be the, well, back in my day girl, especially since I'm only 39 years old. But when you blow off a legitimately dangerous move like that, because by the way, like Mox, I don't say he didn't sell it, but Mox was right back up seconds later. So I get the regular DDT has long since stopped being considered a finisher. However, it's still dangerous. And then you add the element of now you're, 3 feet higher, 2.5, 3 feet higher, and doing a DDT from that high. It would not take much for someone to slip and get seriously hurt. So a legitimately dangerous move, and it gets blown off immediately. And all that does, and I get it's wrestling, especially wrestling in 2023. you, a lot they threw realism out the door a long time ago, but that doesn't mean you have to like it. Um, but anyway, all that does is make me not want to care about any other move or think that it's fake and it doesn't hurt. And I can attest that it does fucking hurt. Shit does hurt. By the way, after saying all that, and this is, I talk about at times, watching old wrestling and it's completely bipolar. At times it's going up and down and all around. And I talk about sometimes Impact Wrestling has been, you know, bipolar with their shows. It's like after I bitched and moaned about all that, after I spent all show bitching about people doing going to the picture-in-picture commercial breaks where they're running around doing all these spots, and then just as we're coming back from a commercial, running in and putting on a hold. It's almost like I was doing a live watch along of the show. Mox and Swerve heard me and got pissed off and decided to teach me because during this commercial break, the highest high spot during the commercial break was Mox scratching Swerve's back and then did a superplex. That was legitimately the high spot of it. And they literally were just exchanging holds. It was doing a little bit and selling big. And that was literally the commercial break. Legit. The best job anybody did of wrestling during the commercial break was Moxley and Swerve Strickland. So they were really telegraphing the time limit draw here. If this was the only match, because this has been going on now for 4 weeks now. This is the only match that they ever kept bringing up the time limit. This is the only match where they had Justin Roberts doing time calls. He did the 10 minutes, he did the 15 minutes, he did the 4 minute call, you know, and it's like, okay, they're either going the time limit or they're going 19 minutes and change. So Swerve steals from Mox's playbook and stomps on Mox's face and uses the 12 to 6 elbows. But Moxley gets out of that, and eventually, when Swerve goes to the top rope for what a maneuver, Mox pushes him off to the floor. They played the count out, but Swerve gets in a 9 and gets curb stomped for a 2 count at the 15-minute mark. This was when the match picked up. It's like, okay, we're going to the finish. They're hitting big moves. The crowd's getting super into it. And it's like we haven't peaked yet. We're like just starting. We're just really starting to get into this here. And the match is over. And the match is over. So what happened, and this is why I attest that, they had to have been going, 3 more minutes, but whether TBS told them they had to get off the air now, which, considering the next show is Modern Family, I doubt it, or just, Tony really wanted to get the show off the air at 10:05 and suddenly realized he couldn't get it off, they had to end the match now. The match just ended. Like, you know, you could go back and say, oh, well, they were building to the finish for a few minutes, basically, since they came back from a commercial. But like I said, it really picked up once Swerve came back in off the 9 count on the count out of the 15-minute mark. And then the match basically just ended from there. Um, so the finish was Swerve hitting the stomp for a near fall. He goes for the JML driver, but Mox rolls through, hooks Swerve's tights, and gets the pin. Nobody was expecting the finish. Plus, Swerve's shoulder was up, which they called. So I'm thinking, okay, well, maybe they do a gimmick where they show the replay, they show that Swerve's shoulder's up, and they go back in and they do the rest of the match that they were going to do. Nope, that was just it. That was it. And it was pretty good. It it was about 2 minutes away from a peak. And if they had gone those 2 extra minutes, especially if it had gone as well as it appeared to be going, this could have been an amazing classic match that most Winter is Comings, if not all, have had. And because I remember the one year they do the was it Winter is Coming when they did the Bryan Danielson Hangman Page 60-minute draw? Someone's probably screaming at me saying no, that wasn't that. But you know, they've done like this was the classic match that or the classic moment you're supposed to get Winter is Coming, and just something didn't hit. Sadly, the show was not over, and this was where I mentioned earlier that Hangman comes back because we are magically whisked outside the arena where the Devil's masked men are attacking Hangman Page. The devil himself was in the car, and he gave the masked man permission to give Hangman Page the old Ron and Don Harris H-bomb onto and through a car windshield. And yep, I bet that was real glass. And this is where again they were fucking rushing. This was Russo. I don't want to say this wasn't Russo and TNA rushing because nothing's ever going to beat that when it comes to rushing a fucking show. But in comparison, this was Russo and TNA rushing because they were like, it's like they had to get this angle in now, 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 now. It couldn't be postponed to Collision. I don't know why. Like they could have still taped it here and put it in Collision, like, it happened there, and they could have just ended the show with Mox and Swerve. But it's like they had these last 45 seconds and they needed to do it now. And they H-bomb Hangman Page through the car window. Excalibur's barely had time to get over the gravity of the situation and really put it over when suddenly, out of the blue, I'm watching Modern Family. And it's the episode of Modern Family, the season six premiere after Cam and Mitch got married. And hey, again, Modern Family is a great show. Big Bang Theory is a hell of a show. But y'all barely want to listen to me talk about wrestling. Y'all really don't want to hear me talking about Modern Family and the Big Bang Theory. But the show just uh, I said this when the show, and I said earlier when they had six matches on the show, it's like was this fucking show going to be 6 hours long? And when it wasn't going to be 6 hours long, it's like they needed to cut shit or they needed to cut the time of shit. Like Hangman Roddy, it went like 12, 13 minutes. It could have gone eight and accomplished the same thing. And again, this wasn't even to, oh, well, we needed 5 more minutes for Roosh and Jay Lethal. No. Like, first of all, you give the 2 minutes back to Mox and Swerve to kill it at the end there. But then you had the extra 3 minutes at the end that you could have played with to really sell that Hangman angle. And maybe you didn't really need the whole 3 minutes. But what I'm saying is shit didn't need to be rushed for the last 45 minutes of this show. And it was because, like Vince Russo, it was overbooked. Unlike Vince Russo, like if it was Vince Russo, you'd have 85 segments and the six wrestling matches would total 6 minutes total for the entire show. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is he put too much shit for this show. Shit could have just been cut. Like I said, that Riho match, I get it. I get you need to push the women. I get that. This wasn't the show for it. You like there was no like you either had to cut the Riho match or the Hangman match, and the Hangman match comes back in the end. And so cut the Riho match and put it on Collision for fuck's sake, especially at that point, because they were already, more than an hour into the show and they still had four fucking matches to go. And you weren't, and as we mentioned, Tony really doesn't like cutting time from these tournament matches if he can help it. So it's like, yeah, the Riho match, that's one of the times where you say, and they've done similar shit in the past where they announce stuff for Dynamite and then say, oh, by the way, this week on Rampage, it's the match we told you was going to happen on Dynamite. I'm sorry. That's like, this is nothing against Riho. This is nothing against Ruby Soho. This is, you know, everyone has their time to shine. There's time for everyone to do something great. This wasn't the show for them. They could have been pushed to another day, another show, etc. That's what I'm saying here. This show was good. It could have been great. The main event was good. It was very good. It could have been amazeballs. That fucking angle at the end, it could have been a lot more than it was. It is what it is here, people. And the sad thing is, a week from now, are you gonna fucking remember that Hangman angle at the end of the show? Maybe, maybe not. Because I'll tell you what, I didn't remember that fucking Shayna Wayne angle until they mentioned it halfway through the fucking show. And then it never got brought up again. And this is AEW's thing. It's like they they are booking a lot of fucking shit. And then it's like it doesn't like you need to hammer it home. You can't just have, you know, last week's main event is Christian and Adam. Okay, fine. Neither of them are on this show. There should have been more to it than a 30-second video package in the middle of the show that was mentioned and never brought up again and forgotten about. It's like they're trying to they're trying to serve too many masters here. They're trying to do too much. Maybe they need to actually do that fucking unofficial brand split that they were teasing when Punk was around because at and I don't even know because like at this point, like most of the time, people only wrestle on one show during the week. Like you get exceptions like now with this tournament, especially with the Danielson injury and a few other things. You had to have people on both shows to make up for it, but you know, you gotta, I don't know. It's like, oh fuck, where the fuck's the Don Callis family been? Powerhouse Hobbs body slam Big Show on a car a month ago. Have they been on the show at all since? And again, somebody's probably gonna scream, "Hey, dumbass, they were on Collision last week or something." I'm sorry, I don't fucking remember that, and it's obviously not, that big of a fucking deal. But anyway, here I'm going to say this. I am not an AEW hater. I'm not an AEW lover. I like AEW. AEW Dynamite and Impact Wrestling are literally the only two shows that I attempt to make sure to watch every single week. I may catch a few minutes of Raw, I may catch a few minutes of SmackDown, I may catch I may watch Collision, but a lot of it is I have more things to do with my fucking life than sit here and watch wrestling 7 nights a week. You may not believe that since I do all these fucking podcasts, but I really do have more shit to do with my life than watch 40 hours of wrestling every week. But, I love AEW. I want them to succeed so bad. By and large, I would rather watch Dynamite than watch, an episode of Raw. And it's not just because one's 3 hours, one's 2 hours. I tried watching Raw this past Monday with Punk. Literally, I was ready to give up, an hour in when they announced Punk was coming out at the top of, the 9 o'clock hour. And I'm like, great. It's like, and the sad thing is, it's like, oh, it's not just I love Punk. It's like fucking love Rhea Ripley. I'm madly in love with Rhea Ripley. And if her match hadn't been in that first hour, I would have skipped it and not bothered to gone back and rewatched it. And that's the truth. It's like there's just I don't know, there's more to life right now than watching 40 hours of wrestling a week. And I applaud the people who can make a living doing this and who enjoy watching that much wrestling every week. I am not one of them, but I watch what I enjoy. And when I stop enjoying it, I stop watching it. And right now, WWE television on a weekly basis is not something I enjoy watching, and so I don't watch it. AEW, I do enjoy, and I'm going to keep watching it until it drives me up a fucking wall. Because hell, I watched WWE long past the point it drove me up a fucking wall. So I stick around long past the point here. But what I'm saying is, I've also gone way too long here today. I've gone probably at least an hour here. So we're going to cut it off now because guess what? I got to go to bed because, like I said, I don't make a living talking about wrestling. So I got to go to bed, wake up in the morning, and do this again. So no weird news of the week, but check out episode number 70 of something else. Check out the Smoky Mountain Rewatch Along project, which, judging by the numbers, I should be plugging this show on the Smoky Mountain show. But what the hell? Maybe because I'm reviewing AEW, maybe the numbers for this show will be through the roof suddenly. Maybe. We'll see. But thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you again later on.